Well, it's time now to look at the week's political developments with two members of the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Marieke Walsh is a parliamentary reporter for the Globe and Mail, and Janet Silver is a managing editor at iPolitics. Both of you, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Hey, guys.
Okay, let's start with one thing that caught my attention. We had the briefing today from Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos and the officials from the Canada Public Health Agency. But he revealed that 10 days after announcing that because of Omicron, Canada was intending to test everyone at the airport coming from international destinations outside of the U.S. That was supposed to be put in place. But today, we're still only halfway to testing all of that target group. And he couldn't say when we'll be testing them all. I'll start with you, Marieke. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's to be honest, the same thing they've been saying now for about a week and a half, insisting that these rules are in place while also admitting they're not fully in place. And when you look at the government's own travel website, it says that the rule is, quote, coming soon. And so this really does tie into these questions around whether the federal government and all of its agencies have the capacity to act on the rules that they bring in place. This is what the Auditor General also raised this week, and she said that they have failed to enforce the past border measures. Minister Duclos says that they are getting much better now, and it seems that they are increasing. But again, if they're not telling us when it's going to be fully in place, then a measure that's supposed to stop a variant that's already here is not actually in place. And so what is, every little bit helps, but certainly it raises questions about the efficacy of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Janet, your reaction. I know you watched the Auditor General's report too, and there is a resonance there, given what she had discovered for the government's performance between February and June of this year.
Exactly. And Duclos has said, the health minister has said, look, we're trying to do better, and acknowledge that they weren't doing well enough before, saying, we've hired additional services to help us do testing. But like Marieke was saying, this far in already, and we're still at half capacity in terms of testing, it doesn't seem at first glance that we've really learned the lessons from before. One would expect, knowing that there are variants, and there'll probably be more variants, that we should be ready at airports. It's one of those things that a lot of people who are contemplating traveling, I think, are now going, maybe not, because there's so much confusion as to what is going on in terms of testing, and that's confusion across the country from coast to coast to coast. You don't know, there's more tests being done at some airports, and you just don't understand or don't know, and you can't get that from the government. And for them not to be able to say when we're going to be at full capacity or when we expect we'll be at full capacity still raises a lot of questions.
Is one of the difficult things, and Marieke, you referred to it, and that is we have these policies, but for example, when the question is often asked, why are we not testing people coming from the U.S., many people have said off the record, well, we just don't have the resources. That would overwhelm our testing capacity. So is the whole question Canada not having the capacity to fight a pandemic?
Yes, I think that's correct, and I also think it's correct that it goes beyond this issue of the borders. At the press conference following the AG's press conference yesterday, the Auditor General's, Minister Duclos issued a mea culpa. He said, at the beginning of this pandemic, the Public Health Agency was essentially a research agency operating at a macro level. Their role at the time was to anticipate pandemics, which the Auditor General has already said that they also did inadequately or failed to do. But their role was not to gather data on hundreds of thousands of travelers, track them, be able to share that information. And so they have been building all these things in real time. But certainly when we're unable to say when a rule that was apparently necessary and announced 2 weeks ago is going to be in place, it raises questions not just for travelers going through the system, but also for the management of the spread of COVID-19. And it raises questions about how this will be managed going forward. I think it's pretty obvious to say that if we do not have the testing capacity for all air travelers outside of the United States coming into Canada, then we certainly don't have the testing capacity for all air travelers, including those from the U.S., because the U.S. is our biggest source of these travelers. Yeah. And so clearly, whether they're saying it or not, they don't have the capacity.
Yeah, I mean, there's many, many lessons to be learned from this pandemic, and they will be learned over the years. But let's look at another big event that's coming up next week. As this fall sitting of Parliament starts to wind down, the big event that a lot of people are waiting for is on Tuesday, and that's the economic update. We have every indication that this economic update is not going to be like some of them have become, a big mini budget with lots of measures mentioned or announced. There is a suggestion there'll be a few things announced. Marieke, what are you watching for?
I think that whether or not there's big measures has more to do with the fact that we just had a budget and then an election. So there hasn't been a lot of time in government to actually do the policy implementation and execution of what's already been announced, let alone enough time to develop new policy, given that we've been in caretaker mode for much of the last half year. I think this is going to be a budget or an update that really is, again, unfortunately, back to a question of the pandemic, what this economic update says about where the government expects the pandemic to go and the impact that that will have on our healthcare systems, on our economy, on businesses and individuals. Because I think that's still, the government wants to get past it, everybody wants to get past it, but that's the immediacy of what they need to be dealing with.
Janet, what are you watching for? Obviously, we've just spent the last 10 days of Parliament watching the opposition parties drumming the government over, accusing it of being responsible for inflation. Some of them are pressing for some measures. What kind of dynamic, what are you watching for, and what kind of dynamic are you watching here?
Well, first on what I'm watching for, there are three things. The government has talked a lot about housing affordability, so I'll be interested to see whether or not there's anything more that comes out of this fall economic statement in terms of housing. That's something that's also come up with the opposition. Another thing I'll be watching for is what they're going to talk about in terms of the seniors, the guaranteed income supplement. It's something that the Bloc and the NDP have been talking about for months, especially given all the pandemic benefits and the clawbacks that have happened for seniors on guaranteed the GIS. It's been really difficult for a lot of seniors on a fixed income. Freeland indicated the other day that, yes, there was something coming from for seniors. They understood that there was some real problems there. I'll be interested to see if they address that in the fall economic statement. And the third thing is with regards to inflation. I know the Conservatives have talked a lot about this. It was mentioned only once in the throne speech. We're at an all-time high, for 20 years at a real high. We just had the PBO, Parliamentary Budget Officer, report yesterday talking about the gap between the rich and the poor and how that is increasing. So there's a lot of pressure on the government to do something to address the rising costs and inflation. It'll be interesting to see how they address that in this fall economic statement. And if it's not mentioned, of course, that will give the Conservatives a lot of fodder because it's something that they've been raising almost every day in the House of Commons and calling it just inflation, which ironically is something that the Prime Minister even spoke on yesterday in the House of Commons in the question period as well.
Got quite a reaction out of that. Last question, quickly, Marieke, with my MPs, we discussed the Monday announcement of the new mandate or the mandate review of the Bank of Canada. That's sort of crucial to the whole debate, too, about inflation. And the rumors are that it's going to be basically very similar to the current inflation-fighting targets. That's something to watch as well.
Certainly, and if the government hopes can deal with some of these cost of living questions and inflation questions ahead of the fall economic statement. But I think Jen is correct that the cost of living is going to feature largely, and that's because it is what's on everybody's mind. When you talk to MPs, that's what they say their constituents are seeing. So, yes, every party is talking differently about inflation, who's to blame, what the solution is, but every party is talking about it because it is so significant to the actual everyday lives of the people they're serving.
Okay, well, and also, obviously, Janet, as you mentioned, with Christopher Freeland saying that there will be some sort of announcement about how they're going to deal with this clawback of the GIS on pensions, that's key to getting an accord with one of the opposition parties for C2, the bill for their new pandemic support. I want to thank both of you. Thanks very much. Have a great weekend, and we will regroup. Obviously, we'll watch both Monday and Tuesday's announcements with great interest. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you. Happy Friday.